a good thing I'm starting out with this because I am currently going through this transition myself. So I only resigned from my position with the Department of Defense in June this year, and then transitioned to the private sector in August. So I am very much still going through this process myself, and a lot of times I am experiencing the difficulty that is translating my experience as an intelligence officer, which really, if you're doing this in the private sector, you're probably breaking a lot of laws. So it doesn't really, translate very well to what is going on in the real world. So just to give you an idea of what the different ways that I am exploring, figuring this out, is I've started to run kind of experiments for myself in terms of how I explain my previous profession to others. And each night I will try something different if I'm meeting new people, because I've been going to a lot of meetup events in Portland, doing a lot of professional networking, so on and so forth. So each evening I will try something new and see the reaction that people have. And right now, one of the best reactions I've had so far is when I tell people that I am a trained people person. And that's really what the best translation I have from that experience as an intelligence officer into the private sector is I am trained to work with people, I am trained to understand people, and then kind of bringing that into the business world. And that usually is something that is tangible, that people can understand. So another example would be if you were a military officer, there's so many things that don't translate right away, but what always translates is something along the lines of, you are trained to deal with a large underbelly of, what's the best way of putting it? Subordinates, if you will. I guess that's a more military terminology. But you say, I am trained to deal with the people under me and make sure that they have everything that they need in order to get their job done. And
transition for me, I got out in 1996 out of the Navy, and in 2000 I married, or 2001, I'm going to get that right. I married a Navy officer who was in intelligence. And so the transition for me was rather abrupt back in 1996, and I tried actually going to PCC at the time, and it didn't really work out terribly well. And so it took me several more years, actually another decade, before I was able to do that. But it was interesting because as I'm going through and I'm becoming a military spouse, I got to see what the transition looked like. Because both from a civilian perspective and then coming home and seeing when my wife came home from drill, she was a reservist, having her transition back and forth. So I saw this every month. And it really reminded me that a lot of what the things you're talking about is in a manner, it's reinventing yourself, but I don't really like to think of it that way. I like to think of it as reinventing your vocabulary.
Yes.
Because yourself is not going to change, actually, in many ways. And one of the ways I started doing this was actually, going out on the web and saying, well, what did I do in the Navy? And just literally Googling that. And then seeing how people describe that. And then trying to figure out what those terms were and if those terms were commonplace, if that was the language that I needed to do. And I started using that language in my resumes.
So I actually ended my service in 1995, and in the Coast Guard, my primary responsibility was search and rescue as well as confidential message traffic. So I had high intense circumstances dealing with search and rescue as well as law enforcement as well as so on and so forth. And my transition into the civilian world, for me, was pretty seamless. I exited the military and immediately went into finishing my bachelor's. So I actually accessed my GI Bill quickly. I learned very quickly to get a certified copy of my DD-214, which was basically my birth certificate to the military. And since then, I have never let it go. So transitioning into the civilian world, again, learning a new vocabulary, because within that 4.5 years, I was drilled with military terminology versus civilian world. If nothing else that I can convey to anybody, I would consistently repeat and drill it into your brains to get a digital copy of your DD-214, regardless of what you do. Because if you're applying for a civilian position versus a state position, federal, so on, you have to provide documentation to that effect. So there you go. So transitioning, it for me was very easy. You know, I just simply went from the military to the university system, and that worked for me.
One of the great things about control systems is that if you can run one control system, you can run any. I was a lighting design specialist, so I ran control boards, sound boards, whatever, and I had a background in electronic principles in the military, so I understood power flows and schematics and knew energy systems. So it all translated really well to this new burgeoning profession that, you know, renewable energy back then. And now we're still developing the control systems aspect of energy integration for wind. And I monitor our systems and make sure that there's enough energy to meet the demand. And if there's not, we have other balancing resources, we call them, to meet the lack of wind resources.
So for me, what my military service actually translated into, when I completed my bachelor's degree, here I was all excited, you know, here I'm a collegiate graduate, oh, fantastic. When I went to apply, I was applying to telecommunications companies, and I ended up with, at the time, US West, and here I was, again, thinking, phenomenal, I got my degree. Yes, they wanted me to have my degree, that was a requirement, but they were all kinds of excited about the fact that they didn't have to spend $250,000 to have my top secret security clearance redone. So it was a matter of, it was the combination of my degree versus my top secret, which the two of them together basically allowed me to manage individuals. And bless their hearts, they looked at me as I'm their supervisor, who were easily my, age-wise, my superiors. And they listened to everything I had to say, and I managed the team. I mean, it was a matter of the military experience. I walked in and I said, okay, this is what we have to do, this is what we need to cover, and there you go.
Military experience. As a nuke, I ran nuclear reactors on a submarine, which is one of the craziest things you can do, I think.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make any sense. I went to work I was recruited by and went to work for Intel afterwards. And the main reason is the skills that I learned in the Navy, the attention to detail, the following a procedure, the leadership, the working shifts, and being able to function. All those things are just four of the things that Intel was really looking for. And they were looking for nukes specifically. And it worked out very well.
So I guess I'm not going to talk about any specific hard skills that I take from my military background, but I will take the soft skills that people don't necessarily realize that they've been learning the whole time that they have been involved in the military. And one thing I always tell people is the United States military is one of the most diverse institutions in the entire world. You will work with somebody from every background, every ethnic group that you could possibly imagine. You will have a background and a wealth of experience in terms of working within a diverse environment that a lot of people in the private sector wish their company could have. And in order for these companies to succeed in the future, I would argue they're going to need people with those soft skills, maybe with a military background, to come in and basically educate or expose their workforce populations to that type of skill set. A secondary area, which is as a intelligence officer from the Department of Defense side, it's a heavily male-dominated environment, and I had so many instances during my career where I was the only woman in a non-support staff capacity with my units. And I can't really share it in polite company, but when I was in Afghanistan, my call sign was an extremely derogatory kind of term because they were kind of emphasizing that I was the only girl. Through that, I learned a lot about myself and what I needed to deal with and how to interact with that. So now that I work in software, another extremely male-dominated environment, I come at it with a very kind of comfortable level of maturity and confidence that I think has already helped me in my new career path, because software is pretty male-dominated. So.
I advise to a lot of students, and specifically when I'm dealing with veteran students, the one thing I can tell you that if you're going to give advice to a veteran, primarily they have to be invested in their own education. If they can't be invested in their own education, that's, I mean, this is probably not the most university appropriate response, but tell them to go into the arts. Tell them to take a course. Let it be sociology. Let it be one of the liberal arts courses. So they can kind of get their feet wet. That'll give them the time, one, to be able to support themselves financially, and to two, begin to realize, okay, is higher education where I want to be? Do I need to go in another direction? Because it's going to give them the basics of, okay, you have to submit your assignments, you have to do this, you have to do this. It gives them that personal responsibility. If they can't be successful in that kind of a course, then they're certainly not going to be successful in, let's say hypothetically, engineering, business, science, or any other course. Not to say that the arts aren't just as valuable, but it does give them that broader perspective. And they have to be invested. If they aren't, then it's a matter of stay in the military, or stay with your parents, stay with your friends, get your head on straight, find your other resources, but don't come into higher education.
At the U of O, I'm going to estimate here. I did do all the stats. I didn't do well in math. Strangely enough, but I'm going to estimate that 70% of the veterans pick one of three majors: business, history, journalism. Which, if you think about it, if you're a veteran and you work with a lot of veterans, makes a lot of sense. I get to make a lot of money. People in business make a lot of money. I like history. It's tradition. I lived on tradition. In journalism, I get to tell everybody my story. So those are the three. Like I said, 70%. My estimation. So when I say take a philosophy class, I mean that. Because critical thinking is what gets people successfully through school. And a lot of the military, depending on what you did, critical thinking was not on the top of the list of the things they taught you. But they weren't taught the critical thinking skills that I was taught as a nuke. I was taught that if it doesn't look right, you follow the procedure. If it doesn't look right, you may take this myriad of other actions. And if somebody gave me an order and that order was not right, I didn't follow it. You know, and that's that type of thing, that it's the different mentalities of the services can differ drastically. And so critical thinking can be a very foreign concept to a lot of veterans. And so the philosophy class, one of the biggest wake-up moments I had was actually in grad school, taking the philosophy of research class. Dear God, it was dull. It was horrible until about third week, and then I realized, wow, that really makes sense. They did this, and that didn't work, so they went in and thought about it, and then they did this, and it just went back and forth like that, and all of a sudden it's my favorite class. Because I got to actually start putting pieces of that puzzle together.